Hi there, everyone. It's Marc Laurenson here from Sydney Astrology School. Thanks for joining us as we talk about one of the most important transits that are going to happen in 2025, and that is Neptune's ingress into Aries. Okay, everybody's talking about it, and I'm going to be talking about it with my good friend and fellow astrologer, Nicholas Polimenakos. Have I
Thank you.
pronounced it
That
correctly?
is pretty good, Mark. Yeah.
Polimenakos.
Polymenakos. Yeah. It's
Polimenakos.
many crafty, the last name. Yeah,
It
that's
rolls
what
off
it
the
is.
tongue, doesn't it? Polymenakos. It's
Polymenakos. Yeah. The first day of school was always interesting for me of when they did the roll call. And it's like you could tell the English teachers, the people who taught grammar, they're the only ones who can really pronounce it
yeah.
correctly.
Yeah, it's a great name. When you get your tongue around it, it sounds really lovely. It's one of those, yeah, as I said, Polymenakos. It's lovely.
Yes, yes. I thanks, mom and dad.
So you are on the Pacific West Coast and I'm on the Pacific East Coast. Okay,
Yes.
both on the Pacific Ocean. And you're on the west side of the United States, and I'm on the east side of Australia down here. And I got to meet Nicholas for the very first time in January of this year when he was down here visiting Australia. And I live on the Gold Coast where we had the FAA conference. And we got chatting and we got to know each other and we become friends, which is great. I love it.
Yeah, no, it's very synchronistic uh
Yeah.
in ways. Yeah. And yeah, no, it was great and it was good to meet you face to face and been a fan of yours. I've noticed your work before because of social media and stuff and seeing your names on recordings and certain events. But yeah, it was great to meet you and a lot of other Australian astrologers when I was
Yeah.
there in your beautiful country, and I so enjoyed it. I'm looking at airfare tickets every day.
Yes, I hear you coming back down again.
Yep, it's a plan. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So what we're going to be doing, what we're going to be chatting about, because this year is the year, 2025, 26, everybody's talking about it. All the astrologers are talking about it because it's one of those years that all the outer planets are changing sign all at once. And this does not happen. Okay. So we've had Pluto change sign into Aquarius earlier this year. We're going to have Neptune moving into Aries pretty soon, which we're going to talk about. And then we've got Uranus moving into Gemini in July. We've also got Saturn coming up to catch up to Neptune. And it's going to be a big deal when Saturn and Neptune come together at 0 degrees Aries. So, again, we're talking about real life-changing kind of stuff that doesn't happen. And so, we need to talk about it. But I think a lot of people want to talk about it on a global level. They want to talk about it on the level of what's going to happen politically and in different countries and all that kind of stuff, which is important. Of course it is. But, I want to chat about how it's going to happen in our lives. I'm much more of a personal astrologer. I make my living out of doing readings for people and teaching, of course. So I want to go down that road a little bit more. I want to go down the road of how Neptune moving into Aries in all of our charts is going to affect us, how we're going to go through the changes and what we need to do to come into alignment with what this particular energy is all about, because it's such a contrasting energy when you think about it. You're thinking about a planet that's always going to be about release and diffusion, in moving into a sign, moving into the first sign, which is about activation, which is about bravery and getting things going. So the combination of those energies and how to understand those energies and how to work with those particular energies is going to be a big deal for us. And 0 degrees Aries is the Aries point. It's the shot of the gun. It's the big bang, so to speak. It's the beginning of the zodiac. And so, again, that force or that thrust of energy is coming through at the same time. And then, of course, we have Saturn coming to join it later too. So there's a lot of stuff going on, isn't there? There's a lot of stuff in the mix here. But
Y-
before I throw my 20 cents worth in, and I have a tendency to do a lot of that, I want to find out from Nicholas what he thinks first. What are the first things that come into your mind when you're thinking about this particular transit?
It's interesting you say like I like to throw my 20 cents in, you know, and it's interesting how we live in a world right now that we've come to this point where I think most people have tools and they use the internet to throw their 20 cents in.
Yeah,
And so they have their own individual thoughts, their opinion, their whatever drives them to put a reel up or to write a blog actually, or to get them to a place to have to output and show who they are, however they're communicating, whatever tools it is. And
yeah,
I think it's interesting because I think some of this transit has to do with how we've done that in the past. Let's say of how the Big Bang happens in Aries too, right? How one initiates and how one expresses and the will, the drive to do that. And some have the courage to do it. Some are don't know how and they're learning.
yeah,
Whatever that it is, I think with Neptune being here, I definitely feel that there's in the initial part of a story like this, with each person is recognizing where they are and who they are. Earlier, you said my last name, right? You
yeah,
said my last name, and I'm thinking about it, and I was like thinking right in that moment, like, yeah, that's me. That's who I am.
yeah,
Right. So in one way, that's representing, that's like the crest on my chest, that when I'm going out into the world, that's the name that I have. And I'm going out and already expressing myself through my surname.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
So there's this thing of how we stand in the world and how we show ourselves. Right. So for me, on an individual level, and in the Aries part of someone's chart with Neptune coming in, that could maybe start to get diffused, or one, it might actually start to question what that is, right? And
exactly.
Aries is dealing with the now, the instinct and the impulse and the courage to deal with what's immediately in front of them and have the drive to go out there. I must do this. I need to do this now. You have a planet that comes in like Neptune, it brings in a bigger questions. It seeps in that immediacy place.
Yeah,
And that's where one of these questions, I think, at times for individuals in their chart, it gets really interesting. And you think about this isn't like for a day. We have a 14-year transit that's going to happen. So it's a long journey and a long question or possible answers to that question. And is there even an answer to any of that? So those kinds of dynamics I find interesting with a sign that wants to, or a planet that wants to push all boundaries, no boundaries,
yeah,
right? Diffuse,
yeah.
fog it up, right? For good reasons, we will say. And so, for then a sign that is immediate now, clear, supposedly in its intentions, right? And it seems like the combination of the two could get confusing. So those are my initial thoughts. I don't know what you think about this, but
I love
uh
that because
yeah.
so much is coming up for me with what you're saying. Because what I'm getting from it is a little bit like we have to kind of let go of who we are. We have to release who we are or what we thought we were. It's a little bit like a feeling of being a certain person or being a certain way or enacting ourselves with a certain demeanor or a certain nature. And it feels like there's something on that level of being able to come into a new version of that by having to release something or diffuse something or let something go around, possibly around things in our personalities or things in our identities that aren't in alignment with our soul's purpose or what our soul wants for us. I'm getting a feeling of that kind of stuff. You know what else I'm getting too, and this is kind of controversial in a way. Um, I'm going to go down the road of saying it is dangerous to want something.
Ah,
Want something is dangerous because, Aries is a sign of getting what we want. Aries, I'm an Aries, so I know what it's about. Aries is a sign of making sure that, everything we want happens. And I want to say getting out into the world and going out and wanting and wanting and wanting, I'm going to go down the road of saying it's dangerous because what happens when we want is we're kind of vibrating an energy of lack. if we want something, then we're pretty much saying we don't have it or we lack it. And so therefore the vibration is a vibration of lack when we go out wanting something. So I got a feeling that Neptune is trying its best in Aries to actually come into a brave place where we can let go of wanting and to kind of realize that we've already got everything we need, to already come into a place of feeling everything you want is already here, everything you want is accessible. It's not going to take you away from that Aries energy of getting out into the world and activating, but that feeling of trust, that feeling of trusting the process is probably more important at this particular time and going with the flow of something rather than going out like a, yeah, you want to say
I
something?
think that's interesting because, typically if Aries is going to do something in the moment, a Mars ruled sign, they know what they want in the moment.
Yeah,
Um, and a lot of times, depending on where we come from, we're taught ways to get what we want or what we're supposed to do in the world, and that's what we want. Um, in many other ways, um, something beyond us, we could say it that way. Some people, their beliefs, their faith systems, or whatever, um, um, surrendering to that or having faith in something like that, in a sense, also shows where one goes, or they find themselves in a particular place. So there's the want, and there's the other thing of like, if I was like, oh, I'm gonna take this canoe and I'm gonna go into this river and I'm gonna let it, I'm not gonna try to steer the ship. I'm not gonna try to steer the canoe. I'm just gonna try to stay in it. And it's gonna go somewhere. And that particular way of going through life, right, is more going in on the Neptune realm because then you're like you're wanting to do that, so there's want, but rather than that you're just letting it take you to wherever it is and accepting for that for what it is, wherever you end up, or the journey along the way to the next stop. So that's the more Neptunian way of kind of going through.
yeah,
And then if there's the want thing, so I could see what you're saying, like especially these days in our world of what want is and how that can become detrimental. And it's like, and I think if for each person it's different. I think they might have to gauge how this story is of like how they stand in a place of letting go and letting the river take them to the
yeah,
next stop,
yeah.
basically. So
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly. And to me, Neptune, everyone thinks Pluto and Saturn and even Uranus they're challenging planets, they're difficult planets to deal with and to come into a higher version of. But I'm going to actually say Neptune is the most challenging. I really believe that because it flies in the face of our humanness, because being human is always going to be about control. It's always going to be about survival. It's always going to be about getting out there and making it happen and keeping our hands on the steering wheel really, really tight. And Neptune is asking us to let go of that. And we're not taught that. We're never ever taught to just go with the flow of something or allow it to just take its form the way it's supposed to. We're never taught that. We're always in there. We're always in there meddling. We're always in there trying to, to get our sticky little greedy fingers in
Mhm.
amongst it all. And to really pull back and to have this real profound version of trust that there's something beyond us that's working it all out easily and efficiently and without any kind of drama. We don't trust it. We really don't. We kind of mentally understand it. We go, oh, that's a nice thought, I like the feeling of that. But we don't really trust the process of life turning out the way we want it to, unless we're in there driving the cars crazily and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
taking and bumping into things along the way. So it's a,
It is.
it's a challenging transit. It's a challenge.
Yeah, it is, and I think, yeah, again, if it's one of these situations where always one has to, they're trying to put their place in the world, know where their place is, and knowing what they want, and the control thing. Again, in many cultures or modern world, I think it's been forgotten what it is to, let's say, stand in life with a type of acceptance of, let's say, one's integration with nature instead of trying to control in nature or nature integration with nature and knowing your honor and your humbleness and connected with nature to the world, I think gives one a completely different way of existing in the universe because you realize that not that you're at the whims of something else, but that way of being present changes your mindset, changes the way you do things. And there are like again, there are certain things that come through that feel like they're beyond you, even though they are you,
Yeah.
that do guide you. And it's that little fine line that I think one has to understand because we do have to do things in the world and pay the bills and go through the mundane. That's a reality,
Yeah.
right? You know, but on the bigger picture, why do we do these things or what is it and what ways and all that? And this is where I think Neptune slowly comes and dissolves certain ways of being, things that worked before, actually, for a person of how they stood in the world and how they took action in the world. Maybe they're not working anymore,
Yeah.
right? And it's hard for one to let go of that control, and because if you are in a survival mechanism type of way, but then here comes Neptune to slowly seep in
Yeah.
and maybe brings those questions. Or it's not even a question. It's the dream. It's the daydream. It's the fog. Once things were clear, the fog rolls in. Now what is this? It's like you're still in the same place. It's just foggy around you. So all of a sudden your perception is changing and
Yeah.
you're looking at things from a different way.
Mhm.
And I think even in that type of scenario with a Neptune transit, I think it feels like you can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
And people get to those places. And then I think it's like, there you are, that place of, can I let go? Can I let go of control?
Yeah.
And that's the key here in a transit like this, right? So
Exactly. And the Aries part is the bravery of doing that, to activate that and
that's
to be
right.
brave enough. And in one of your clips, for in Sparkles of Gold, Nicholas has got a great YouTube channel called Sparkles of Gold. You talked about surrender, which I loved. And this is big on that. This Neptune is big on surrendering. And a lot of people think surrendering sounds so defeatist. It sounds like I'm giving up, but it's exactly the opposite. And so I'm feeling that the Ariesness is about the bravery or the activation or the fire behind surrender. Because to be able to surrender and to be able to give up what you want and where you're going in life and truly, honestly trust the process of where it wants to take you without any guarantees or without any, I need that result, I want to find that. The bravery that's needed to do that is huge to be able to actually just go, I'm not, I'm not after anything, I'm not after a result. I'm not after popularity. I'm not after, people coming into my life and making me feel good or bad or whatever it is. I'm not after any of that. I'm surrendering right down to the raw spiritual core of who I am
Mhm.
and then be
Yeah.
brave enough or Aries enough, to activate it or to manage it, in a way where I can still be a human, I can still be a person on the earth plane, being an earth plane being, but I'm in a completely different space now. I'm in a completely different, it's almost like all the stuff that I used to worry about, or all the stuff that made me anxious, or all the stuff that I kind of craved for. It's almost like putting down the backpack for me. It's that feeling
Yeah.
of I
Yeah,
can
if
breathe.
someone had the feeling of the backpack or whatever tool ones they use, even sword and shield, let's say from an Aries point of view, like it gets tiring,
Yeah,
Like
stop the
you,
fighting. Stop
yeah,
fighting.
you gotta chill sometimes, I'm
Yeah,
remembering now what you mentioned on a video that I did about the surrender because I think I was talking about like you say the word surrender to Aries, and that is just not a word they're not
it
gonna
doesn't
accept in
compute.
vocabulary.
It doesn't compute.
On the battlefield, you do not do that. You don't do that. Like, I'm not going to give up anything. As a matter of fact, I'm going to double and triple down on it. And
Yeah,
so there's times where one must do that, right? But I think here with what we're saying, when it comes to surrender, again, anybody watching this is to even take in that word surrender and see what it means to you? And if you wanted to get more distinct about it, like let's say that your chart and you were looking at the Aries part of your chart, like what does it mean? What does that word mean for you in that part of your chart, the themes and the narratives that happen there? So yeah.
Exactly. And we're bringing it back to the chart because this is really great because 0 degrees Aries is in everybody's chart somewhere. If
Yep.
you're a whole sign person, it'll be the beginning of a house. If you're a Placidus person, I'm a Placidus person, it's going to be in a house somewhere. Okay. So whatever house it's in, and particularly if it's making aspects to any of your natal planets, it's going to be a big time for you. The next couple of years are going to be really, really big for you on the level of pretty much everything we're talking about. I feel that being in Pisces for the last 14 years, it feels like we've all been kind of in a like anesthetized, that kind of feeling of everyone's just going through, really bad things are happening and bad, and people are coming into power and you go, oh my God, how did that happen? And all those kind of things. And we're kind of all anesthetized around it. Nobody wants to do anything about it. It feels like, everyone's just looking at each other going, what's going on? Do you think this Ariesness is going to actually wake us up in Aries? Is it going to actually go, where have we been asleep for the last 14 years?
Yeah, I think when it comes to like the cohesiveness of things, like with Pisces and knowing like the collective and like you could say the psychic collective, the emotional collective, I think everyone feels like they're in the same boat, right? They find themselves there. And then there's pockets in that boat of just like certain types of belief systems in the sense that have been created or people found themselves in a certain pocket of the boat and then they have these certain types of belief systems and it's there and it feels connective, but is it? And I actually think there's kind of there could be like a mass, it's like a hypnotic delusional state that people in certain groups or the collective maybe have found themselves in.
Mhm.
And this is I think the more darker side of like a Neptune and Pisces transit.
Yeah.
And I think at the end of this transit, sort of with Saturn there is maybe starting to show parts of what that actually really is at the end of this transit. And so, let's say with Neptune going into Pisces, one steps out. And again, I don't think it's the stepping out in a way of like, here's me on the real and I need to show myself and da da da. It's a different type of individuality I think here that one goes into and maybe needs to step out of a certain type of Piscean situation. And where one, has the courage to step out of a situation that feels cohesive, but really is it? And is it really truly aligned with one's core place, their will
Yeah.
in the universe, right?
Yeah.
And that's the question. And so something like this comes in, people one can step out of us. Oh, that's an example, can step out, or one questions themselves individually again by themselves,
Mm.
and then needs to play out the questioning in the real world and in their dream world,
Exactly.
right? So there's that. I know we're probably going to talk about Saturn and Aries here, but I think we have, it's a key factor, I think, in this and for the next couple of years in this and how somebody steps out or takes the road less traveled again, like that, this type of standing in the world. But yeah, I feel what you're saying here when it comes on a collective level and feeling like I could say on a social media post, like, and using astrology, and I could say, oh, I'm feeling this anxiety, da da da. And I set this thing up and I'm really feeling it. It seems that way. And then there's a certain percentage of people come in, I'm there with you, exactly, da da da. And then we keep the conversation going. And then if we look at life of like what we say it means something in the world is important. Like what we say we create,
Yeah.
what we do with our bodies, we create, and we're in a certain place. And then there's a bunch of other people like that. What we're doing is that the reality that we're creating, right? And we're supposedly doing this together. But what is it in the end? And I think in the process, it's easy to get lost in a place like that. And then you find yourself shipwrecked,
Yeah.
possibly later, and is it really aligned? And again, it's like how do you find definition there and how do you get there? And I think the change from Aries or excuse me, from Pisces to Aries starts to switch that narrative up a little bit. So
It sure does. It sure does. And then, of course, Saturn's going to come into the picture and really condense that down into something that we have to look at uh, in a very real way. But there's a lot of people probably watching, going, when is all this going to be happening? So I've got the dates going on here. Now, Neptune stays 14 years in a sign, so it's going to be in Aries until 2039. But we're just talking about its ingress into Aries at 0 degrees Aries, which it hasn't been in since 1861 to
mhm.
1875 was the last time that Neptune was in Aries. So, 165 years ago, basically. So Neptune ingresses into Aries on March the 31st, 2025. It goes back into Pisces again for another dip into Pisces, October 22nd of this year. Goes back into Aries again for the final time and stays in Aries January 26, 27 of next year. Sorry, yeah, January 26, 27 of next year, depending on where you are in the world. I'm a day ahead of in Australia of people in America. So it depends where you are.
Yeah,
Okay,
you
so
jump off the cliff first. You jump off. You jump
yeah,
into the waves first. I'll watch you.
with the
We'll
crash
watch.
test dummies. I remember, the Y2K thing in 2000, where everyone thought the computers couldn't handle moving into, and everything, planes were going to fall out of the sky and everything. And we were the
Yeah,
crash test dummies for that.
yeah.
Anyway,
Well, you all salt to the earth down there in Australia, so you can
yeah.
handle this then. So
So Saturn, here we go. Saturn's moving into Aries, May 24, 25. And they're 1 degree apart at this period of time. Saturn and Neptune are 1 degree apart until July 30, 31. And then they're conjunct at 1 degree of Aries, okay? And they separate on August 15, 16. Saturn goes back into Pisces again from September the 1st and the 2nd, and then goes back into Aries again and then comes into conjunction. This is the big conjunction everyone's talking about. And then comes into conjunction at 0 Aries. So we've got Neptune and Saturn at 0 Aries between February 13, 14 and February 23, 24. So that
mhm.
10 days or just over a week and a bit, we've got Saturn and Neptune in Aries at 0 degrees Aries. And then they begin to separate again. They come back to a 1 degree conjunction at 1 degree Aries, February 27 and 28 until March 3 and 4 of next year. Okay, so you might have to write those down if you want.
Well, it goes to what you were saying about some of the narrative, the basic narrative of the astrology of 2025 of how, we have all these outer body planets moving and kind of almost testing the waters and then going back a little bit and then eventually going in, and mathematically, like if the astrologers out there, when the exact conjunction happens, it isn't until the 2026, but it's here. These places in January or July, August, September, they get so close mathematically to being conjunct. They're conjunct. But I think it's one of these things where it's like a liminal conjunction because of taking of step, and like we're going there, and then they start to move back, right? So again, with outer body transits, I appreciate things like these types of movements, because it actually gives a little bit of space for
Yeah.
people to at least start to incorporate it in their world. If you're going to have an outer body planet or a Pluto or something like that, it's just switched and it was in that sign forever and never went back. I mean, I think it would be pretty intense.
That'd be too much at once. Yeah.
Yeah, outwardly, yeah. And so, this is the kind of dance that we're doing,
I like
and
it. I like the fact that we get a bit of a breather, even though
yeah,
some people might go, oh, it's gone back into Pisces again. So, what's happening here? Because am I going to go back into my old ways? Or I always think it's probably a way of the last time you can wrap this up.
yeah.
It's a feeling of the last time you can really put a ribbon around this and come to some kind of conclusion with what that meant for you.
Yeah, like right now we're making this, it's March 22nd, 23rd, the end of the month Neptune leaves or it ingresses in the Aries. It's
Yeah,
going to go back into Pisces. Later in the year, imagine yourself if you're in this moment and you're recognizing where Neptune and Pisces is now, and later when it goes into Aries, you slight perspective change, you're accepting you're watching a video like this and you're accepting possible scenarios and definitions of a transit and you're starting to incorporate it in your own world what it means to you. And then you were to go back later in the year and go, oh, 29 Pisces again. You you've already shifted. You've already shifted. So even if you have to clean up old stories or come to wrap up stories, you do have a slightly different perspective than
exactly.
at this moment now. And the transit changes. It changes for people and it can. Or
Yeah,
there's those who might not see the change now watching a video, but later on they do. I think it varies for people, but regardless, I think it shifts a little bit.
yeah,
And again, I like dances like this because one could, I think, not feel completely swept up. And I say swept up like if you were swept up in the waves, uh, of a Neptunian situation.
totally, totally. And then you get Saturn coming in. And this is going to be really interesting. Saturn and Neptune come together roughly every 36 years. So the last time they were together was 1989. They came together before that in 1952, 53, and before that at the end of World War One and the Russian Revolution, uh,
Yeah.
1917, 1918. So you get a feeling 1989 was a huge year. And as far as the dismantling of Europe, basically. The Berlin Wall came down, communism started to dismantle big time in Eastern Europe. So you get a feeling of, a structure coming in or Neptune coming in and dissolving a structure, dissolving the wall, the way of life. So here in our own lives, we're going to have to kind of face our personal version of what this might mean. Saturn, as we all know, Saturn's really, it's the realist. It really looks at something, straight between the eyes. It's kind of like that's what's happening, that's what's going on. Neptune, as you know, on the other side of that, Neptune is the illusion or the fanciful or the connection with the greater good, which is still as real, but it's real in a very, very different context. Um, Saturn is very much the realist here and right now in human form on the Earth plane. And so I like this combination. I think a lot of people are going ooh about it because it's such contrasting energy trying to come into our lives all at once. But I feel that something is happening here where that new Neptunian energy, which is trying to find its place in a new sign, Saturn is basically coming in a way to be able to organize it or manage it. It feels like
Mhm.
Saturn is trying to pull it in and give it some form or give it some shape or giving it a purpose or giving it somewhere to go. So if you have Neptunian kind of inspiration or a Neptunian kind of feeling coming over you and you want to activate it, or you're feeling a little bit like, oh, there's a fire in my belly about something and I can't quite put my finger on it. Neptune could actually put something into your life where you feel I'm kind of responsible for what's going on here. I'm kind of responsible with how I'm going to use this. It can't be just fluffy. It can't be just me just going, oh, look, this is new energy coming in. It kind of feels like I've got to do something with it. I really got to make it productive in some kind of way. Now, this doesn't mean you have to start working on something or create a project or whatever. If you do that, that's fine. But to me, it feels a little bit more like I really have to realize the contract I signed before I came here. I'm an evolutionary astrologer, so I speak on those terms. The contract I signed before I came here had everything to do with me trying my best to live as close as I can to my sole purpose while I'm human. Okay. And I feel that this has got something to do with that. It's got
Mhm.
something to do with me remembering and being responsible for my contract. and trying my best to be able to bring my spiritual sensibilities or my soulful understanding of who I am and life, and looking at ways of being able to find that in the concrete world. You got
Yeah, I
anything to that, Nicholas?
Yeah, I think it's interesting here because first of all, while we're making this video, it's a week from now, we're going to have this last eclipse that's going to happen in Aries. And I say this because of the type of astrology that you do, evolutionary astrology, and it takes in the nodes. Last year and a half, we've been doing these eclipses, North Node in Aries and South Node in Virgo. And I feel like there's been a prepping period here. And we're also making this video while Mercury's retrograde in Aries, Venus in Aries, how it's moving from Aries to Pisces, Pisces, Aries, these smaller planets, these eclipses, almost prepping, I think, for these bigger transits that are going to happen or are happening with Neptune and Saturn. And so I think uh, if let's just say one jumped into the Neptune and Aries pool and I'm going to let myself go into this one and they found themselves there and there were certain types of visions and possible revelations you couldn't put your finger on it but there's something that's happening and it's not only questioning who you are in the world but maybe you get to a point of like oh I must be this way in the world and then you're going to do it through the Aries archetype, right? And Aries, again, remember, we knows what it wants in the moment, so on and so forth. But let's say it's deeper than just in the moment, that it's bigger than that with Neptune there. This is where one can use Saturn to, like you said, put it into form and to matter slowly. And I don't think it jumps fast out of the gate. And I think some of this Aries stuff that's happened with the eclipses and what's happening now, one wants to, there's certain types of Aries, Mars energy that wants to go now and do it now. And you burn hot and burn fast. And I think transits like a Saturn and Neptune and Aries, I don't think it's burned fast. And so when the vision is be able to be constructed and have some basis and stability with Saturn, I think it's a slow burn. It
Mm.
is one way to look at this. So if one were to use these planets together in that part of their chart, I think though it's training is involved. If you're let's just say you're an Aries, right? You're an Aries. There's certain ways you know how to do it, and then you're like, say you got to do this, but you can't do it the way you used to do it or as fast as you want to do it. Or you want to, the blade is sharp and it cut, like it doesn't. We're gonna say you have to do it a completely different way. And it has to be methodical and it has to be slow. And there's your desire is there, and you have the structure, but then I'm going to ask you, you have to completely let go of control at the same time. And then that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense to have to let go of control and the want and the action. uh, that it's like a philosophy. It's like a different type of martial art to learn. And
Yeah,
it's like in the beginning parts of that, we want Saturn there to establish something. Now, I think for some people it could work this way,
yeah,
where one has the examples of what they call the authority in their life get in the way of their dream, let's say, their Neptune and Aries
yeah.
vision, and there's something represented in their life that gets in the way, that hovers over, that's on the shoulders, that brings the pressure of that. Saturn could do that. It could be
For
represented
sure,
that way.
for
It
sure.
totally can. And one has to come to terms with what that is and accept Saturnian rule sets there.
Yeah,
Again, this can happen in many different ways, but can we get to the place of understanding how the two can work together? And as we know, when we're dealing with conjunctions, we're dealing with seed moments too, and we're beginning like a beginning of a cycle. And I think that's a really good way of looking at it and understanding that the cycle takes a long time. And
yeah,
if one can understand the time and the pace, the time of Saturn, the certain space that you're in, I mean, we're talking wide open everything
yeah.
space of Neptune. If one can understand that and find the ways where they surrender and other ways where they do take control, that their autonomy, the way it feels empowering and understand their balance like that in their own life, I think that's how one can manage it,
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's great. And you've got to also remember this is the beginning of the Saturn Neptune synodic cycle that happens every 36 years. So this is the beginning of the next 36-year cycle that they have with each other. And at 0 degrees Aries, they're having it at at that point. And so there was something about, because when you go back and have a look at the times of when they were together, as I said, it was a dismantling of communism in Europe. Going back to 52, 53, it was more, the Korean War had just finished, and there was something called McCarthyism that was coming up in America at the time, where people were being dragged out of Hollywood and being dragged through across the coals about and accused of being communists at that particular time too. So there was this huge kind of, you know, again, people were being treated badly. There were people who were being victimized at that particular time as well. It was a really difficult time in America. And then, of course, the one straight after the Second World War. It happened right at the very tail end of the Second World War, but it was also the Russian Revolution. It was also
Mhm.
the beginning of communism as we know it now. So, it has this kind of feeling, this Neptunian Saturn kind of feeling in our lives about us being able to come into an all-encompassing kind of understanding of life and understanding of where we're going and our place in life. But at the same time, it is still trying to bring it into uh, a usable, workable kind of structured form that does have rules and does have regulations. So,
Yeah, how does one stand? Yeah, how does one stand in the collective? And I if we even think about the last time we did this, which was 89, and when this Saturn Neptune conjunction happened in Capricorn, and what happened with Pluto going through Capricorn since then, and
yeah,
you gave an examples there of certain structures and walls being washed away, but in the end, we're dealing with authoritative situations and the structures of community and of countries and of people. We're dealing with Capricorn and the rule sets that are created that we abide by. And here now, like in Aries, do you abide by them? Right? We're coming into this new place. These outer body planets are changing over this year. You see reflections of it in the world of certain things changing. You're talking about McCarthyism. There's certain hints of this happening right now in the United
yeah,
States.
yes,
So, so,
exactly.
so, so, it's interesting when we look at astrology and we look at this, we always can learn. Even if you're not an astrologer, we always look at history and the stories we tell through history, and so there is this type of thing. I think it's interesting now though, what individualism will mean and how that plays out. And I think it's humans, a human being inevitable uh will find themselves in certain places in life where they quote unquote feel a calling, or there's no going back, or like they are washed up on from the waves and crashed and burned. Now what? And so I think it's this kind of situation where one is in the billions of people on this planet still could be washed up ashore and like I'm alone. And what do I have to do now? And then there's the survival mechanism that kicks in. And then, but one has to look at how they do that
Yeah,
in the structures they are, the tools that they use. And I think this is key. And I think this is where creativity of a Neptune situation comes into play of how one takes the visions and the different types of like what is presented to you from a Neptune transit. And then when one does that, when let's say we go back to like putting Saturnian form to it. And I think this could actually be inspiring and it could be fun at times when someone's in a situation when then it's like, well, I do have a brand new wide world ahead of me. And there's a struggle of these worlds crossing outside of me and culture. But what about me? And from a creative Neptunian creative level, where I think it's where it's psychic and sensitive and tied into this everything and nothing void of Neptune.
yeah,
How do you funnel that? And even if you don't know how to put words to it, but you feel the calling
yeah.
and the intuitiveness, it's channeled somewhere. Saturn can help you do this. And
Ex-
even though if you don't know the
Exactly.
answer to where you're exactly going, that's you trust that
Yeah,
and you do get some definition and you see who you are in the world. So there's like this thing of dissolving and eventually unification that happens in the long run, that can happen within oneself. But then from a big Neptunian world perspective, there's a possible unification that happens too. Now, but to keep it within the realm of Aries, it starts with me, starts with you,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So,
Exactly.
sometimes we think of Pluto and Aquarius like we're gonna do. There's these things as we do as collectives, and I'm a believer of it. I actually think that the Saturn Neptune story in Aries for the next couple years, 2, 3 years, is part of the bigger Plutonian picture in Aquarius. But in order for, I think, people to come in with something new and from an Aquarian mindset as collectives and communities, it's always the local first. It's always one has to see where they are first before they jump into
Exactly.
the whatever
Exactly.
circle they're going to pick.
I
And,
totally
and so
agree.
for again, to sum this part of it up, for anybody out there who might be feeling fearful of the transit, or they have a Saturnian type of fear that comes into this in the Aries part of the chart along with this, it's like, I'll tell you, a great way to do this is to look at it from a creative, intuitive perspective, and that you're not losing anything.
Yeah.
And you could have that you could still have that sense and spark and big bang part of life that you mentioned, Mark,
Mhm.
in Aries, but it's Neptunian creative that comes in there. And I think the letting go into something like that and accepting that journey, one still feels like they're putting their individual selves in the world in process and they're not lost, right? So it's just
I love
um
that. I love that. And I love the idea of, coming into the Neptune part of who we are and the Neptune part of our lives. When we talked about surrender earlier on and we talked about having to dissolve, when the surrendering and the dissolving to me is more about the letting go or the release of everything that's in the way. Everything that's in the way of us becoming the people we want to become, or even just being on the planet and doing what we want to do on the planet. It's we have so much that's in the way of that. We have so many, anxieties and negative thoughts and self-esteem issues and parents and money and all that crap is all in the way. It really is. And the surrendering and the letting go and the diffusing is not about we're going to have to let go of the stuff that we love in our life. It's about diffusing and melting the crap, out of our lives and coming into a much, much more soulful place with ourselves based on that ultimate trust in who
yeah.
we are and where our life wants to go organically, where our life wants to flow easily. When I do readings for people, one of the first things I say about before we get launched into the reading is that the chart really has a natural flow to it, that it's really trying its best to guide you to where it wants to go in a really, really positive way. And the only person that's going to get in the way of that is you, you know?
Yeah. The
So
client, yeah. The client comes in, you're reflecting back and you're facilitating and helping. And, but you hope. And usually clients, I mean, usually it happens though, whether it's in the session or after, one does make the connection. One does see the connective flow. And sometimes it's in a place where someone they looked at their chart and they go, that doesn't flow there. And they had certain situations in their life reflect that in the past.
yeah,
So that means it's going to be like that all the time, right? And I think it's the stepping out part. It's the stepping out part and letting something else come in. And this is more of a Neptunian thing. You let something else come in where it fills in the blanks. Maybe at this point in time, the Neptunian thing is the fog dissipates
mhm,
and someone sees the connections in the flow in the chart, right? It's interesting with Neptune how fog comes in for reasons and it dissipates. It's always moving. It's
yeah,
it's these forms. So with something like that, it's like, can one understand after a certain period of time in life to understand of how the world or the universe works? And I think a big part of this is the trust in the unknown and the mystery of something like Neptune. And with something like that is you're also we're talking about spaces in the chart, right? And like that's another word I would encourage people to look to meditate on, like besides surrender, is what the actual word space means to you. because it
Yeah.
actually happens in different ways. There's the Neptunian way of what space is. There's the Saturnian way of defining space. We're defining it with boundaries. We need to do this.
Mm.
We need to. And that sometimes those boundaries constrict us. Neptune's way of coming in with space dissolves those
Yeah.
boundaries. And so think about if you were like your perspective in that
Yeah.
way, in the push and pull. Do you sometimes maybe we're gonna in the Saturn and Neptune conjunction of Pisces, we'll lean more towards the Saturnian way of being in the situation. And then we might have to be fluid and we have to be maybe lean more to the Neptunian way of viewing space,
Yeah.
you know. And so this that dance, it's a dance between the two. And I think if someone understands this and finds their flow, like you talked about, whether it's in
Yeah.
their chart or however it's happening to them, um, one feels, again, I think, connected to who they are and gets to do the Aries expression, and at the same time feel like uh, it's just fine to surrender, right? Too. It's you can do both, you know.
Yeah,
It's not,
exactly.
you know, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
And what I find fascinating too is the last time it was in Aries was 1861 to 1875. This was a big, big time in American history because this was when slavery started to was abolished, basically. The Civil War, Lincoln came in, Abraham Lincoln came in 1860. Civil War, of course, started very, very soon after that. And it was all about the freeing of the slaves in the end. And it moved in that direction. I'm not that big on American history to be able to give you all the details, but I know that there was a shift in slavery during that particular time. And that's a Neptune in Aries thing to do because you get the Ariesness of having to fight for something, but it's Neptunian. It's fighting for the underdog or fighting for the victims or fighting for the disenfranchised or in America's case, it was fighting for people who had no who had no identity or had no dignity or had no they had no place. And you can really see Mercury and Neptune in Aries in that context as well. Whether
yeah, you
something
know.
like that will happen again, who knows? But
Yeah, and I think this you bring this up because I have my personal opinion. Think what is happening currently in the United States, and this is my opinion. Everything comes back to the place that you just mentioned, Civil War and the finances that were involved with plantation owners and slaves. Everything, the whole country's based on that. Besides being, it's separation from the British. I mean, there's that. But what happened afterwards, the financial part of the United States, what it was, is based on slavery. And this has come back. It's never gone away, actually. It's come back. And so a lot of the things that you're seeing currently within the country really has to do with those who want to go back to those times, who've
uh,
never left those times, and sneakily always putting in certain things and rules or taking away laws and adding laws for those who are black or brown and
mm,
what considered minorities and whatever
yeah,
there. This is ingrained in the personality of the United States. And so here we are, we're going to see what's going to happen with transits like this that are reoccurring. But I
mm,
just thought I'd bring that up because that's never gone away. And even if one were to push it away, here it comes back up to on the bigger astrological cycle thing too. So again, and then how do people, I can imagine at the time there were those in the North part of the Union, how they viewed, in the laws and things written in the art, the Constitution, certain things about being an individual and your rights and equality and
yeah,
balance, right? These things, and here we are now, and from the Aries perspective of what one gets to be in the world and is deserving of the world, of who they are in the world, and to be given the inherent human right to be who they want to be in the world.
yeah,
And then there's that part of it. Then, as a collective, the belief behind that, and then the interesting ways people discern that belief. Because a lot of what we're at now is people talking about one's freedoms, but there's certain factions that say this is for freedom, but they're suppressing the freedom of others. They just
Yeah.
won't say it out loud,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
So all of this culturally, like, I think here with a transit like this will be played with from Neptunian perspective of certain chains that get washed away, and a certain type of collective, possibly movements that
Mhm.
happened, with the unifying principle of what equality is, and then the fight for this.
Yeah.
I'm trying to stick to the Aries words here, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's so, from the assertive perspectives, whatever. Now, for again, whether it's the political part, but on a more individual level, again, I think it has to do with what boldness and assertiveness means to people. And I think this is very important. I actually was thinking about this the other day because, from an Aries perspective, if we encourage the Aries perspective, like, no, we support you and your pioneering spirit in the world, the rugged individualism. But are the actions from that place affecting other people?
Yeah.
And this is the thing about the interesting polarity between Aries and, let's say, Libra, where Libra is going to think about every single person there before they're going to make the decision. Aries must not gonna think twice. They're gonna do it for themselves.
Yeah.
And we need that in the world. But we are in the world with other people. And so it's like if this rugged individualism and the assertiveness and the impulsiveness and you're being headstrong with the will, all that kind of stuff, here comes the situations. By these your actions, do they affect other people in what ways? And I think here, this is where, from the collective level of Neptune and from the Saturnian perspectives of like how far one goes with this,
Yeah.
how far does an Aries go and which way is going to be the key. And this
Yeah.
affects one's personal life. And I think in a bigger realm, and that's part of the dance. And again, for someone out there on a more your own personal world, we, regardless of what sign that you are,
Hmm.
or you might say, I'm doing these things, Neptune and Saturn, I'm going to go for it. I just went through eclipses. I just did all this stuff. I'm getting what's mine. It's like, okay, you go get what's yours, but you are in a collective. You are in a thing that really, from a Neptunian perspective, is everything and nothing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you do there are consequences, so I think it's the edge of this. How far does one push? And if their dream, and if they are like called upon from a Neptune perspective, they start to build it with Saturn. And then they, let's say, get a steady fire going. They start going. It's like, well, is there any collateral damage, from this? And I think that's just part of the story.
Yeah.
And one has to understand that. And so again, I think one can be pioneering in their life, but and understand the freedom behind that. But you also have to be aware of the freedom of others, and
I love that. I love that. And it rings so true to me. I'm an Aries Libra, I've got my sun in Aries and my moon is in Libra. So I'm always dealing with that, that battling around the opposition of things. And I think being the age I am now, hopefully I've got them both kind of working relatively well in my life as well as they can be anyway. But what I'm feeling about this is that the Ariesness in everybody, not just people who are Aries or moon in Aries, but the Ariesness in everybody will be pulled in. It will be pulled in, and it will be pulled in a way, both by Neptune and by Saturn. It'll be Neptune will be pulling it in on the level of what you just said, Nicholas. It'll be a feeling of, I'm part of everything. We're all one, we're all in the same boat together. We all come from the same source. And it's being pulled in by the recognition of that. And Saturn is, you realize that there's consequences attached to everything you do.
yep,
So therefore, your responsibility for living a spiritually soulful life as an Aries or wherever you have Aries in your planet, you are responsible for that. And so anything you do outside of that that's going to affect other people negatively or, just make life more difficult for the people around you, it will, in its own way, it will come back to you. And I'm not scaring people by saying, oh, bad person, you get bad stuff. I'm not doing the old-fashioned karma thing, but
Yeah.
it's a Saturn recognition. It's a very, very Saturn recognition of you're responsible for yourself and how you play your
Yep.
life this time around.
Yeah. Yeah. And I again, it says all depends on the person and their part of their chart, I think, of how this something like this plays out. Um and from this year, if we, again, stick to now, like this Venus and Mercury retrogrades, in Aries, and then what we do with the in and out of Saturn and Neptune this year, I think you start to taste what this is. And I, some people are in situations where they must do things now, and I understand that's life. If you're the Aries part of your chart, you get to have a little bit of perspective and don't feel like you have to rush out and do something right now. Like I think a lot of Aries, I felt like I've talked to the last couple of weeks, they feel the pressure that the planets are moving backwards right now and they can't get what they want. It's like, what do they do with the built up steam inside them? What do they do with the fire inside them, And so it's like you find ways to remediate that. And so on a bigger level here this year, you get to taste what this entry is, And I think part of the gift of Saturn and Neptune touching Aries and going back into Pisces is one can take something, I think, from the Piscean perspective about wholeness and about the oneness of things, about the empathy and sensitivity and the compassion of Pisces. You don't have to leave that behind going into Aries.
Yeah,
You don't. And it's like, as a matter of fact, you always hold that. You
yeah,
always bring that with you. And I think by doing that and having those filters that you're engaging the world that way, and if you're going to be doing Aries things, then it isn't considered like dark, selfish, or whatever. You're
yeah,
still aware of who other people are, and you could
yeah,
still be your individualistic freedom self and pursue
exactly,
those things. You still
exactly.
do it. You still can
Yeah,
do it, and you could still have the nice balance. And now, I mean, I'm coming from a place right now saying this that is hopeful, that it is that I personally, Nicholas Polimenakos, believe the actions that I'm going to take from the Aries part of my chart. I must do this. It's calling me. I must do this. Nothing's going to get in my way of this.
yeah,
And I have to question what I just said. Nothing's going to get in my way of this. And I have to realize what that is. Because if, like, oh, something will get in my way. And how do I treat that when it happens?
yeah,
There's some times where you have to push the doors down and break the walls down aggressively. But do you do that in every situation and every challenge that comes? And so, the benefit of having Saturn and Neptune together is this goes back to earlier when I said it slows down the process, because I think there sometimes for a certain type of Aries energy, they can at least be slowed down enough. Like, do I bash the wall down like other times when it was needed to happen? Or is it done differently this time? I don't need to do that actually, And so that like curves a certain type of impulsiveness, right? But it doesn't mean that you're suppressing your freedom. It's just ways of doing it and understanding the space that you're in at the current time.
yeah,
So, again, uh, um, each person has to see what this is for themselves in the Aries part
yeah.
of their chart, right?
Exactly.
Um, so
Exactly. This is really, to me, it's very positive because, I'm an astrologer that looks at everything in the chart with how it can work, and everything does have a positive outcome, even if you do have to face a few things along the way, and we
yeah.
do. But, to me, when I look at this, and it's going to be very strong in my chart because, I'm at 3 degrees Aries,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So it's going to be, as soon as it moves into Aries, I'm going to feel it because it's going to be 3 degrees away from my sun and it's gradually going to make its way up there. But, I'm feeling it already. I'm feeling it at the very, very tail end of Pisces. I'm feeling a very, very different energy starting to come into my life, big time, big
Yeah.
time. And for me, I'm looking at it really positively. I'm looking at it in a way of being able to, it feels to me I'm going to get even closer to the person I want to be by becoming a little tiny bit more conscious of why I'm on the planet, the meaning behind why I'm on the planet with
Yeah.
Saturn, and taking that seriously. And the other part of me is is kind of asking me to basically let go of my shit, you know. It's asking me just, is it worth holding on to all that crap? Is it worth worrying about that? Is it truly, when it all boils down, is it worth y- getting yourself, all caught up over worrying, getting anxious about something that really, in the grand scheme of things, doesn't matter. It
Hmm.
doesn't matter. I'm getting this really strong feeling like you're doing fine. Everything's okay. Chill out. You're doing really well. I keep getting that kind of feeling like there's something that's really on my side and something that is kind of looking after me. And I don't need to throw myself into the mix. I really don't.
Yeah, that's really good, Mark. I'm really glad that you're saying this. Like you've had some of these perspectives and like visions and views. Like I don't have to do this. Like and I can let surrender. And there's something else. It's like intuitively recognizing that something's not working anymore, and there's another era or cycle that wants to come in, and or it's coming in regardless. It's just more about like one's own resistance, like how much they hold on, right? So it's coming in regardless. So from the Neptunian perspective, this thing of like, I just take it, take it. Like I did the thing you saw the other day, like throw it in the void. I'm like, just throw it in the void and just take it. It's like the prayer, like the petition, the thing. And but by doing that, um, you're being bold.
Mm.
You're still being Aries bold. It
Oh yeah,
reminds me of a
yeah.
song,
That's
the
what it
Jimi
felt like
Hendrix
to me.
song. The Jimi Hendrix song. It's on Ax. It's off the album called "Axis Bold as Love." There's a song on there called "Bold as Love," "Axis Bold as Love," and there's parts of the song that talk about this. You're being bold in a loving, compassionate manner, right? Bold and courageousness and fighting assertiveness isn't just connected to fight blood and hurt and you know what I mean? It's not it's in everything.
It feels like
In
I have to be bold. It feels like I have to be
Yeah,
brave to do
yeah,
this properly and to do this well. And this is for
yeah,
everyone, not just me.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, I appreciate you, Mark. You're being real here because you're putting yourself, you're showing
Mm.
who you are and where you are in this, and that I think you just the act of you doing this on this video is just another version of like, this is who I am. Not only you're a teacher, an astrologer, human being, whatever, like, but this is where I am right now. This is who
Mm.
I am. You see, and I'm
Mm.
fearless in this, and there is in that there Neptune does bring a certain type of a wide open vulnerability.
Mm.
I, and where you're a part of the big wave of everything. And again, that could be very scary
Mm.
for people to
Sure.
come to that place.
Sure.
It is, and that's part of the process. Even especially like if Saturn's there, they could come it start that way. It could be the fear process of this,
Mm.
right? But I also think, like you've had experience in life. You've probably had other points in your life like this, and you remember, like, I've been here. I know what this means.
Mm.
I've been to something similar before. I'm
Yeah.
like, I know what to do, even though I might not feel completely structured. I know I have to let go. I know I've been here
Yeah.
before, and that's that type of
Yeah.
one's like trust with yourself, and and all that. And I think the ways we do this, the ways people use this or do this, whether it's through creativity or prayer or mantra, whatever they do, that's where structure comes in. Like that's where Saturnian types of knowledge and wisdom comes in to help one let go or say goodbye, to
For
something. So
sure. For sure. And it feels to me that releasing something, or just coming to a place of calming down and getting all that out of my life, as an Aries, it feels like a winning position to be in. You know how Aries is very conscious of triumph, and
Yes.
winning in the end. And the idea of surrender, as you said earlier, Nicholas, the idea of surrender in Aries, it's kind of like, really? We don't get that. We don't do that. But
Yeah.
to here with Neptune in Aries, and particularly when Saturn's coming in, is this feeling of surrender is your version of triumph. If you
Yeah.
can, because really by hanging on to your crap, and still kind of playing a very, very survival-ridden earthly game, you're kind of losing. You're kind of living in a defeatist atmosphere. You really are. So coming into this beautiful Neptunian place where you can really, understand everything viscerally from for truly what it is, and coming into that deep version of trust and release, and Saturn coming in saying in your own way, you've got to do something about this here and now on the earth plane. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to do something work-wise, but it does mean you have to find your way of being able to concrete it or structure it within yourself. It feels very much like a winning place to be. It feels
Yeah.
very,
Yeah.
it feels really triumphant.
Yeah, again, it just kind of goes, this goes all the way back to the beginning when we're talking about like how in our modern world and many cultures don't know what to do with space and change and trusting the unknown, right? It's not having the tools, or a lot of times in other cultures that are more deeper and ancient, stuff like this is always told through story and myth, through people of the stages of a story of one's own journey and the places they find themselves when they get to the surrendering and letting go place, or the ego death, right? The ego death thing that happens, and can now somebody understand what that is, or do they have examples in their life through story and myth to help them understand this process that you know I think a lot of us are going to go through an Aries part of our chart, and to come to terms with it, and to know on the bigger scale that if from a historical story perspective, not the political, but the story perspective, that many older cultures knew this and this was it, and it was ingrained in you as a taught, like this is part of life, where you are present in the world, but at the same time, it's to know when to let the world guide you. It's to know that you can't control everything. And there's times that you do, but it's to know to let the world guide you, and to step out and take that perspective, and to have wonder and appreciation, and know actually the beauty and the happiness in that. And again, that's really hard for some people, when knowing when some of the letting go, it's something that is so ingrained and attached to someone's identity and has brought them good things. But those things change too. So again, how I encourage people to go look in story. It's going to make me go off on a research tangent now, Mark, with this for future, because I mean, as transit is going away, I'm like, oh, this is how this culture
Yeah,
dealt with
yeah,
change in
yeah,
their existence, how one's existence in the universe, and then once they understood that, like then what did one do in their place in the world once they got out of bed, right?
yeah.
It's like so again, it's the balance of letting nature take its course, and then also at the same time you tending to the fields of nature in your world, like your field, and again, I reiterate the perspective from um if one comes from the wonderment place, the curiosity and fascinated place, and the the joy that comes from creating, um I think it's a great way to work with transits
Yeah,
and with planets like that, especially Neptune. Like I just, especially Neptune.
yeah.
And then the cool thing is with Saturn and constructing the creative piece, and then I were to show you my individual piece, and you were too, there is no competition. There's only celebration. There's only celebration because of each person knows the beginning and end to a creative process.
Yeah.
And that in itself is life. And you celebrate those things, right? And you're cohesive and at the same time celebrating one's individualistic art piece that they made,
I love
right?
that.
So,
I love that.
yeah. That's what I'm telling myself. It's just like,
Well, I'm going to take a piece of that along with me, that's for sure. But that's a beautiful way to wrap up the chat. So thank you so much, Nicholas,
yeah,
for
no,
being
thanks
with
for
me
having me, Mark.
and chatting with me. I'm sure the listeners will get a hell of a lot out of what we've been talking about. I hope people, not just people who've got Aries planets, in aspect, or planets in aspect to 0 degrees of Aries. It's for everybody, everybody is going to be experiencing this in their own way. So I hope there was something in there that you can take away and use in your own life as Neptune enters into Aries and for the next, 14 years, but with the Saturn coming in at the moment too, the next year and a half is going to be big for all of us. So lots of love to everybody. Thank you again, Nicholas,
Thanks, Mark. Thank you.
and we'll see you next time. Bye.